Webinar is being set up on YouTube. Just give it a minute.
Yeah, it says it's live.
Yeah, I think that means it's started. It could have already started, but in a
there's
minute
like a delay to it. This is interesting to see.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
I'd like to try this myself.
We are now live on YouTube. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out. Everyone who's in the chat who registered to hang out with us and ask some questions, welcome and thanks for coming out. And for those of you who are just catching this live on YouTube, hello to you all too. This is the Other Life podcast, the best podcast in the world if you're a internet intellectual or a crazy madman, galaxy brain, or other type of dubious creator, academic reject, or defector from all currently existing institutions. This is the best podcast in the world for you. Welcome. I am doing something kind of unique for me in the history of this podcast. Over the past couple of weeks, I've shifted to try a somewhat more practical angle, and I'm doing a season of talks that have a very particular practical focus. For people who've been listening to my podcast for some time, you might know I'm kind of all over the place. I've always used the podcast as an opportunity to talk with all kinds of interesting, wacky people in the best and sometimes the worst sense of that term. But now I'm actually trying to do something with more purpose, which is I'm trying to learn from other people who are working hard on interesting and successful digital hustles, people doing interesting, essentially intellectual projects of one kind or another, but carving it out in their own unique way and figuring out ways to successfully be financially sustainable doing what is essentially creative intellectual work on the internet. And I have a very kind of broad definition of this. I've talked with a few different people in this series so far. But today I'm joined by David Kadavy, who is a nonfiction author who has been self-publishing his own nonfiction books for quite some time now. He left a quite successful career in tech just to be free and to do his own intellectual work, essentially self-publishing books. And David's been on my radar for a long time because there are a lot of people out there doing quite well in self-publishing who are doing fiction. In the fiction world, there's a large number of people who are killing it, making good money and having, tons of readers in the fiction world, in romance and this and that. And a lot of the literature you find out there about how to do self-publishing, a lot of it is with that kind of angle. There are far fewer people doing sophisticated nonfiction of any kind and doing it successfully. There are plenty of people doing it, but there are far fewer people doing it successfully in a way that, and writing about it and talking about it. So David's been on my radar for a long time for that reason, because I've been trying to find other people that are doing serious nonfiction in a truly independent way. And David's one of the people out there who I think is doing a great job. And he's very frank and forward about how his operation runs and what works and what doesn't work. So I was very, very excited to talk with David. I want to pick his brain for my community and for both the Other Life podcast listeners, but also my membership community, the indiethinkers.org community. Other Life and Indie Thinkers are more or less a kind of overlapping project. And for those of you who have been following what I've been doing, you know that Indie Thinkers is all about trying to find ways to help and support other independent intellectuals trying to do the type of project like I'm doing in my post-academic phase. So that's what we're here doing today. That's who we're here with today, David. And I think that's probably enough by way of introduction. And I think, I don't know about you, David, but are you ready to just jump right in? Can I just fire some questions at you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just first of all, thank you. But it's interesting to hear you make that observation about fiction versus nonfiction and the fact this has actually been a tough thing for me. This is part of the reason why I try to write openly about my operation of publishing nonfiction, because all the advice out there is for fiction writers. And I feel like if I hear one more time about rapid release strategy for, first in a series, all these things that I hear about fiction writing strategy, I'm just going to go crazy. So it's good to hear that somebody else out there wants to hear about publishing nonfiction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once I started taking this stuff seriously, it became very clear to me that the tactics and strategies required for doing serious nonfiction just have to be a little bit different. A lot of the advice you get from the fiction world just doesn't quite make sense. But I can't wait to hear more about what you think about what those differences are. So we'll definitely try to get to all of that. I wonder if you wouldn't mind, David, just for the audience who might not know much about your work or what you've been up to over the past several years with your projects. Could you give us a kind of high level overview of your operation, both kind of practically and logistically, but also, if you wouldn't mind, financially? Could you break down the business model of what you're doing?
Sure. I guess right now, like you say, I'm primarily an author. That's the main thing I want to do, is sell books. I have two full-length books. One is a traditionally published book that I published 10 years ago, Designed for Hackers. Another one is a self-published book that I published 2.5 years ago called The Heart to Start. I also have several what I call short reads. I don't try to add that as, books that I published, but there's several of them, around 40 pages or so, on Kindle, or also in other places. And then I have another full-length book, which I've actually been working on for about 10 years, Mind Management, Not Time Management, which should be debuting in the fall. Currently, my readers are purchasing preview edition access to that as I release chapters. I got 5 out of 7 chapters out for that. And I also make a little on online courses, which I do, but it's not like, I don't love courses as much as I love books. I also have a podcast called Love Your Work. That is pretty much a kind of break-even operation. I've got some couple $100 in Patreon support coming in for that. I have some sponsorship coming in here and there, and and then I also make a decent amount on affiliate revenue as well. Primarily at this point, Active Campaign, which is an email marketing platform. And I'd say, I think revenue is somewhere around 7,000 a month, and profit ends up being somewhere around 3,000, or at least the way that I report in my income reports. My income reports are not representative. They're not like my tax return necessarily.
Right.
They're just like the basic things going on in my business that at least allow me to make decisions well. I'm not counting every single penny of every little thing on those. So that's roughly a few $1,000s a month in profit. So it's not a huge amount, but I kind of pivoted maybe 4 years ago. I've been on my own for 12 years. And about 4 years ago was when I decided, okay, I'm going to be a writer. I moved down to Colombia, where I live now, and began that journey. And I'm beginning to really get some traction now, I think.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask you about that too. So you moved to South America. In part, was that to lower your cost of living?
Absolutely. I don't want to feel financial pressure, or I want to feel as little financial pressure as I can in making creative decisions. And I just found that I was doing better writing down here in Colombia. And it's also kind of part of the experiment that I'm going to be telling the story about in the book that I have coming out in the fall, which is just trying to redesign my life so that I'm managing not time, but creative energy. That's the name of the book, Mind Management, Not Time Management. So with cost of living, I simply just did better. Found I just did better writing here. I could design a life around doing my creative work, around doing my writing. I had already spent a couple months here several different times. I had already begun a relationship here as well. So I came down here 4 years ago, and despite some bumps in the road, have managed to stay.
Okay, great. So your move to Colombia coincided with your decision to go full-time as a writer.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was about the time that I started my podcast as well. It was, I really wanted to read what was interesting to me, learn what was interesting to me, and then find some way to make products out of that thing. And I didn't know what that was going to be, and I kind of go through that process over and over again over the last 12 years of being on my own. That has been my model. And it's just over and over again. What's interesting to me? Okay, how can we make some money doing this?
Hell
And
yeah.
then also sometimes, at least for the beginning part of that, especially, is like, all right, well, let's figure out how to make just enough money that I can get by, and then I can free up that time to explore creatively. Thus, things such as moving to Colombia and having a lower cost of living.
Right, right. So, okay. So right now you're doing roughly 3,000 a month in profit. What were you doing when 4 years ago, when you made the plunge? Like what was your financial profile with your independent creative projects when you took the plunge?
I don't recall exactly. I was certainly making a lot more money. I was
You
a
mean
little more
with your job?
focused.
You mean with your job?
No, I haven't had a job for 12 years.
Oh, so what do you mean you were making more money? I would assume you're making more now than you were 4 years ago. So back that out for me then.
Yeah. Okay. So I was a little more focused on online courses then. I've got this book,
Oh,
Design for Hackers, teaching design principles to software developers,
right.
or to non-designers in general. And I've got a couple courses that go along with that. And so I was a little more focused on that. Um, and then I also had a little more affiliate revenue through one of the sites that I started when I was first on my own, which was basically an online dating advice blog, where it wasn't like a pickup blog or anything. It was just here's how to use Match.com to get dates, and I was bringing in. I brought on as much as $11,000 in a month of passive revenue
Oh,
on
okay.
that.
Interesting. Interesting. So I was assuming I was assuming that it was like when you decided to go full time and move to Colombia, it was like you had just started making enough that you could be confident and then you would hustle and grow it. But for you, it's kind of the opposite. It's more like you were making enough to move to Colombia and go full time. And then you kind of decided to focus on maybe what didn't generate the most revenue, but what you were just most personally interested in. Is that, and you actually took, yeah.
That's always been my model for the last 12 years is what I'm interested in. What am I most curious about? How can I make like just enough money so I can follow that? So, I mean, in terms of, success stories, people making bank or whatever, like I'm like the worst person you could talk to because I've been doing this for 12. I mean, I started my blog in 2004. I've been on my own since 12 years ago, 2008. All my friends are like millionaires now, people, but I'm still just, getting interested in the thing, following that and making some money off of once I make a certain amount of money, I go do something else. And I think I'm getting better at understanding my process and what's important to me. And so one of the things that happened when I did make this kind of pivot to where I'm more doing like creativity, self-help type books is what I'm publishing currently. I had my first book, which was design, and I was a very serious designer before that. I wanted to be a world award-winning designer. Did that for a little while, but got to the point where I wrote a book about design and basically taught my mental framework for understanding design and what is it that makes something attractive and useful in a design. And I kind of open sourced that by writing a book. And it took me a while, I think, to realize like, oh, this is what I do. My thing isn't I built this platform around design and now I'm just going to bang that drum forever. My thing is that I am curious about things and I want to figure them out. And then once I'm done with that, I move on to the next thing.
Okay, right on.
So hopefully at some point I can like make that, hopefully at some point the revenue will be higher. I think that's coming soon.
Okay, interesting. So you're not in a kind of like hyper aggressive growth mindset. You're just trying to basically pay the bills, do what you're most passionate about. And it sounds like you are hoping to kind of grow things gradually, but you're not in this kind of like money chasing mentality.
No, I'm very poorly motivated by money. There's so many other things that you can put effort into and get things that are worth money that aren't money. Like, for example, learning a foreign language and learning how to live in a different country, so your cost of living is half the price. Like,
Right.
like, that's something that you can do, and your money suddenly works better. So yeah, what you're saying about growth is true. It has been an exploratory process. My main metrics have always been creatively focused. You're probably starting to see a lot more methodical talk in my income reports. So much to the point I lost a Patreon supporter recently who was like, "You're like too much into the optimization stuff now. I don't like this. I liked it better when you were like creative and all over the place." But yeah, I am starting to home in on sort of what my offering is coming up soon, or at least with this book that I have coming out. And so I am starting to focus more on a little bit more on growth strategy things.
Okay.
So it has been a very long process, I think, of finding like founder product market fit.
Mm.
And so now I've kind of got that. And now I'm starting to feel more comfortable with being more strategic about growing things.
That's really interesting, actually, and that's actually somewhat insightful, I think, for people listening, because it really shows that there's a lot of variability in how your path can work out. You know, periods of growth, periods of just chilling at a level of revenue that you're comfortable with, periods of accelerating, decelerating based on what it is you want to do and what it is you prioritize at that moment. So that's kind of interesting in its own way. I wonder if you could speak to something that a lot of people ask me about, or at least it's a kind of struggle I hear from a lot of people who are interested in doing the kind of stuff that I'm doing, that you're doing, which is, I mean, it's pretty much the golden handcuffs problem. I'm sure you've encountered this, right? I talk with a lot of people who are very smart, very creative, very capable, but they have a high paying job. And at a certain, especially, you know, as you get older, it's very hard to walk away from a high paying job. And in a way, the high paying job can actually be harmful for your possibilities for creative growth, because, you know, if you're currently making $400,000 a year as a kind of senior software engineer or something like that, you might be really passionate and very capable of starting your own thing and having an amazing adventure doing that. But it's going to be a while before you're back up to that amount, if you're ever back up to that amount. And I think for a lot of people, that's an impossible chasm to cross. But I mean, you were in tech, so I suspect at a certain point you were making quite good money. Can you speak to the psychology of that golden handcuffs problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a while there, I was working in Silicon Valley. I was working at startups. I left Silicon Valley in 2008. So you can imagine the opportunities that were in front of me. And it was really a combination of maybe one, not feeling like I didn't feel like I had that much to lose anyway. I mean, I came from Nebraska. I was never supposed to be in Silicon Valley. I didn't
Okay.
necessarily, I kind of accidentally started working in tech. I'm not a coastal elite who went to Harvard or Stanford and like had all these expectations put upon me
Interesting.
from the day I was born. So in a way, I'm kind of lucky that way. And then it felt like I could see people in that sort of golden handcuff situation where they don't know what to do, but like all they can see is, oh, maybe I'll do investment banking. It's like either I'm doing tech or I'm going to do investment banking, and they're in that situation. But it was also being miserable too, which was, you know, I worked for a few years at startups, and then I actually ended up getting fired from the last place that I worked. And it was like I actually thanked my boss. Then I was like, "Thank you. This is gonna be a very special day. This is July 17th, 2007." And
Was it a
this is
layoff, or did you do something naughty, or what happened?
I actually didn't really ask a lot of questions about that. I think it kind of like wasn't working. Um, and the way the attitude I had working at startups really was like, you work at a startup for 8 months and then you move on to another one. That's kind of like the attitude that people have. And so I didn't really ask a lot of questions
Right.
about it, really. I just was like, oh, well, this is great, because I was too scared to quit.
Right.
I didn't really want to be working there anymore, but I was too scared to quit. If anything, like my cultural programming from my upbringing was that if you don't have a job, you like don't exist. And so it was just beyond my comprehension to just quit. But once I was fired, it was immediate. I had a bunch of stock that I bought in this, all this stuff. I was very lucky with a lot of this stuff. So it's like, I don't want to, I don't want to give people unrealistic expectations. I also don't want to drain them, because I was very lucky with certain things. I bought Google and Apple stock
Okay.
like 2003, 2004, when I was shoveling money into it in my first job. I got fired from the job in Silicon Valley. I had like $130,000 or so in stock. I immediately, actually what happened was my roommate was getting an MBA. I thought, well, maybe I should get an MBA. And I kind of thought about the different career paths with that. I'm like, well, I don't really want to go work in marketing at Procter and Gamble. Why don't I just, getting an MBA is going to cost all this money. I've got money in the stock portfolio. It's supposed to be for my retirement, but if I'm miserable, who gives a shit? And so I just thought, well, all right, I just cashed out $40,000. And I just said, all right, well, this is my tuition for my personal DIY MBA. I'll just give myself a year, because I was so burnt out. There was no way I could have possibly worked for anybody else. I said, I'll give myself a year. This is 2007. Give myself a year to just do whatever I want. I'm not even going to give myself any pressure to make money. I'm just going to explore, do creative projects.
Cool.
And so that's the way that I started out. And my reasoning was, well, would it be better to, have a business or some semblance of a business, or to have tried and failed at a business and be short $40,000, or to just like have a piece of paper that tells me that I know how to build a business and I haven't actually done it. That was my reason at the time. Whether that's right or not, I don't know. But that was how I began on my own. I guess that was 13 years ago.
Okay, cool. So you had a little bit of money. You used some of it to buy you some time, clear your head and get creative and to try to figure something out. And this is actually this is before the whole kind of Tim Ferriss moment, or probably about the same time, isn't it? Like you're kind of a contemporary of his in this regard.
Actually, after I got fired, a friend lent me the 4-Hour Workweek.
Okay.
And so the timing was perfect.
Okay. So you were influenced by that.
I was, yeah,
right on.
Absolutely. And so I did a year of trying to build my own tech startup. And I made specs, hired a developer, also spent a year just kind of wandering from cafe to cafe with a developer friend. And we were just working on 1,000 different projects, just throwing spaghetti against the wall. And it was also a period of feeling like we all have these sort of cultural expectations upon us. For me, for a while, it was to have a job. And then when I was in Silicon Valley, it was to be a tech entrepreneur. Even though I accidentally ended up there, like, oh, I need to go raise money and make VC meetings with VCs, right, et cetera. And I built this product, and eventually was just like, well, this isn't right. And so I left Silicon Valley, 2008, about 1 year after I got fired, moved to Chicago to rent an apartment that had 2 bedrooms for about what I was paying for this little tiny bedroom in San Francisco.
Right.
Just to, again, experiment, to get away from the noise, to get away from the echo chamber of Silicon Valley, and to completely explore whatever was in my mind. I just really felt like I just couldn't focus on anything other than this creative drive that I had. And I had people offering me jobs. Like a Facebook recruiter got in touch with me, and some other CEO like was begging me to come work at a startup or whatever, but I just was not interested in any of it. And yeah, again, felt like I didn't feel like I had anything to lose. Like, well, I felt lucky that I even got out of Nebraska and got to Silicon Valley anyway. So what did it mean for me to leave?
Right on. Okay. And so when you first took that plunge and let's fast forward a little bit through the period where you're just kind of experimenting wildly and trying to clear your head. Once you start kind of getting into the groove that you now find yourself in of writing books and building the operation that you have now, when you in the early days of that, were there any kind of particularly memorable things you did badly that you might want to as a lesson you might want to share with other people at that kind of early stage of trying to build up this type of operation?
Well, I built my first website in 1996 on AOL. Some people watching this probably weren't even born then. I started my first blog in 2004. Just sitting there in Nebraska. And I just wish I would have published more often, been less afraid, had a thicker skin. Because first of all, I had very little confidence. I didn't have examples around me. Growing up in Nebraska, pre-internet,
Right.
There's not like authors living around me.
Yeah.
Or whatever. There's not even like all that's available is pop culture. It's hard for people to imagine this. Like to even be able to watch like an indie movie or something, especially like being a suburbanite, etc. So I didn't have the confidence, but I had all these thoughts that were different from the environment around me, but I just didn't have any way to feel confident about that. But I did have the blog and I would write things. And every once in a while I'd get the confidence to write about some idea, such as self-investment. Everybody was telling me, when are you going to buy a house? And I'm like, well, why would I do that? I'm 23 years old. Like, why don't I invest in myself? They're like, what's the best investment you can make? No, like, why would that be the best investment I can make? I would be chained to a house at 23 years old. That's insane.
Americans are obsessed with home ownership. Yeah.
Right. And so I blogged about that, about self-investment, but I didn't like go at it hard, and I didn't. And there's so many times now where 15 years later, I go back and I read one of those early blog posts. I'm like, man, you were onto something, kid. Like, why didn't you I just wish I would have pushed a little harder.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. So yeah, you're saying you wish you published more early and got after it a little bit harder earlier when you lacked the confidence, but really you should have dug deeper and had that confidence. I think that's a really good advice because I encounter a lot of people who are young and they definitely have ideas and they want to start developing this type of intellectual project. But they're just so hard on themselves. And they feel like if their blog post isn't like a genius novel discovery, it's not worth posting. And so this is really well-placed advice, David. That's good. And you also make a good point about how for someone at your age, David, growing up, it was pretty hard to find kind of energy and confidence and an idea network, but nowadays, like anyone can find bloggers that are super interesting and you can reply to them, right? You can actually email them. You can, it's easier than it's ever been. It's sort of a cliche at this point, but in this particular intellectual context that we're talking about, perhaps it's not actually reflected upon enough. How, if you are blessed with ideas, if you are the type of person who is blessed with ideas coming into your mind, first of all, recognize that that's a blessing. And second of all, recognize that there's now no excuse at all really to not be developing them at like the greatest scale and kind of frequency that you possibly can. And I think you're right. Like the sooner you start and the more you put out as soon as possible, the better will be your returns in the long run.
I totally agree that there's not really an excuse not to be out there publishing stuff. I mean, it's just fear. It's something there's my latest book that I wrote, The Heart to Start, is really just like me trying to internalize all the things that I learned over the previous 10 years or so about overcoming that fear, and just trying to like remind myself. So
Right.
yeah, and it's a long journey. I still struggle with it. I still hesitate. I have like a good idea and maybe don't push it as hard as I should, or I think, well, I don't know, is that going to upset somebody, or am I thinking that through? These sort of things that you tell you, or who am I to talk about this thing?
Right.
Sort of things that you say to yourself.
Right, for sure. So that's very good. So let's fast forward even more to kind of the current moment, and I want to learn a little bit more about how you steer your ship. You have this operation which you described before. It's got a few moving parts. You do books. You did do some courses, but that's less of a focus now. You now have a podcast. So why don't you try to share with us a little bit about how do you see these parts connecting? Like what is the kind of strategic logic of the machine? One way to describe this would be, like the typical way people describe this sort of thing is people have what they call like top of the funnel stuff and then bottom of the funnel stuff. So it sounds like the podcast isn't moneymaker, but is the podcast kind of your main way that you create content for a larger audience and that kind of brings people into your world? And then the other stuff is after that, or how do you think about the larger design of your machine and how you steer it?
It is really a machine, an engine for me to investigate or explore anything that I'm curious about.
So how have you optimized it for that? Like, tell me, let us know some kind of insights on like the strategic decisions you've made to optimize for that purpose, whereas someone optimizing for money would maybe choose something else. You know what I mean?
Well, one way has been to try to create that freedom, because when you're creating something and when you're an intuitive, like I think I am, which is that you don't necessarily know what you're creating until you've created it.
Mm-hmm.
Like even my latest book, like I it sort of came out of me, and I was like, I don't know, is this even a book? Like there's this story about Jackson Pollock calling his wife out into the studio and being like, is this a painting? Like I don't know. So when you're an intuitive like that, things are volatile. You're kind of waiting for black swans to come. It's not like you're making toilet paper and you just like make these many units of toilet paper and you have this distributor and you have this margin, and like it's not creative work isn't that way. And so much of society is set up to make things smooth that way. I guess Nassim Taleb would call it mediocrity versus extremistan. Do the creative life, the intellectual life is extremistan, is that you need the space, you need the slack to allow these creative things to happen. So for me, it's important to have some kind of steady stream of income coming in where you don't have to do much of anything. I guess people call it passive income, right?
Sure.
So if I just go back to when I started 13, or when I really started trying to make money, at least, or after my $40,000 was gone 12 years ago, it was, all right, I moved to Chicago. I was billing $100 an hour or whatever to clients in Silicon Valley. And I just said, well, all right, I want to bill 10 hours a week. And then the rest of that time, I'm going to try to make passive income. And then once I make enough passive income, I can start to drop down that 10 hours a week of freelance income. So, I mean, first of all, is lower expenses, and then making just enough money to get by, and then trying to build some sort of passive thing. So I had all sorts of different experimental projects I was doing that were passive. I didn't hate them, but they weren't like my core necessarily. I wasn't like super passionate about like an online dating blog, right? It was just like I was dating a lot. I wrote about it. I had a blog and referred people to Match.com and made money. So the way that the timing worked out with that was that when I got my book deal, which was basically an exploratory experiment paying off, of 3 years of what's in my head, I don't know what it is, and getting the book deal. I also, yeah, I shut off the clients then, but then also timing worked out really well with my main with a couple of different passive revenue things I had, where that started to come in regularly, because the advance that I got from my first book was not a big advance. But that freed me up then to try to make that book as good as I could, which was great because I wasn't really a writer. I struggled my way through writing that book in 6 months somehow. And it was very difficult, but I couldn't have done it. I didn't have any other focus at that time. And so that was sort of the beginning of it. And then now I still have passive revenue coming in through affiliates. So anything that you can find where that you spend money on, there's often affiliate programs available. Sometimes there's a little less in there than there used to be. Like in Commission Junction, you can find them, Share a Sale, ClickBank, and there's varying levels of quality of items that you can promote. And they might be things that you're actually quite interested in. You can do a content play where you write content. For me right now, that is that I have this income coming in through Active Campaign, which is one of my affiliates. They're the email marketing platform that I use. I have YouTube videos and blog posts where I write reviews and comparisons between them and other platforms, almost all of which have affiliate programs. I'm very transparent about, what's good and bad about each one.
Right.
But it's such a competitive industry that they're paying 30% for the lifetime of a customer that you refer.
Right. So you think that you would say, and from your experience, that the affiliate game is a good one to get into, especially in the early days of trying to build up a operation such as ours?
I like it a lot. I think affiliates is a good, it's good practice for a lot of different things, because you don't have to build the product. So many people are trying to figure out how to build the products, and then they're also trying to figure out the marketing at the same time. With affiliate stuff, you just have to figure out the marketing.
Okay. Right.
I mean, there's a product, and then you have to figure out how to sell it. I'm like, it helps if you're interested in it in some way. But I do think that it's good practice. It gets you a little bit of revenue. It gives you a little bit of confidence that you can make some money. Some people haven't made $1 online. Like, you can go make $1 like tomorrow. Just put up an Amazon affiliate link or something, and write reviews for turntables on a blog. Like, it's
right.
So people don't even know about these very obvious, to anybody who runs online business, obvious ways to get started. And it's like making money. I've heard Jason Fried from Basecamp say this: making money is like playing the piano. It's a skill, just like any other thing. And that at least gets you started.
Right on. Okay. So in the early days, you focused on passive income as you were trying to shift away from the freelance work, selling your time for money.
Passive income is still important to me. I'm not outrageously passionate about email marketing platforms, but I use them. I've done a ton of evaluation of them. Like, why not use that knowledge in some way? And also it's not terribly unrelated to what I write about, because I write about creativity and beginning to do creative endeavors. And when you do that, you need to have an email list if you want to survive.
Right. So something I wanted to ask you about is that once you start doing this type of stuff over a certain amount of time, like, you've been doing this stuff much longer than I have, but I've been doing it for a couple of years now. And after time passes, you have many different platforms that you're managing, many different dashboards of a wide variety. And it can be quite overwhelming at times to figure out what exactly you should be focusing on. Like, I constantly check all kinds of different dashboards and analytics. And I'm just kind of curious, from your experience over time, do you have like a particular, what, in the startup world, they call like a North Star metric, or one or two? Is there like one or two things that you really focus on as the main thing that you're paying attention to data wise?
I mean, the last two words there were the words that ruined the answer that I was going to have, which was
Well,
just
you
that
can answer it however you please.
the North Star is curiosity. The North Star is how interested am I in this, and then of course there's the market viability of things. But
Right.
like I said, I'm starting to gain a little bit more founder product market fit. Previous to that, my strategy was very much write about whatever I'm interested in, create content about everything that interests me or anything cool that I figure out,
Okay.
and then review the search traffic and just see what search terms are coming in. And then very often, what you see is, oh, I'm getting some search traffic on this keyword, or there's I'm getting a lot of impressions on this keyword in search traffic, but my ranking isn't very good. But I also don't have any content focused around that topic.
Okay.
And so you start to see these clues. We're like, well, wait, I can write a thing about that.
Right.
Like, and that through that process, you can begin to find that the things that are interesting to people, but that people will pay for.
Okay.
As
So
well.
you took cues from your search analytics. You took that as a valuable signal about what you might want to double down on. What do you use, like Google Analytics, or what's your tool?
Yeah, it's my R&D department, basically. I mean, I've seen so much of my business as an R&D department for a very long time, and that's where I've seen a lot of stuff where, I mean, we were talking about A/B testing on Twitter, and I've got a semi-famous blog post shooting on A/B testing, just because, not that it's not useful, but because people try to use it as a substitute for creativity. Is like they're just not, like, if you A/B test, like eventually you're just going to be making porn.
You're right. Yeah.
So
All roads lead to porn.
yeah, like what, there's got to be some check in here of like what are you actually interested in. So yeah, it was analytics for a while. Now it's Search Console, because you just don't really, because they've changed their privacy settings there with analytics and
Oh, right. Google Search Console is a separate service that hooks into Google Analytics, right? And it tells you how people are coming to your site through search.
I'm not sure whether it hooks into Google Analytics or not. I think you might be able to do it without having Google Analytics, which is I've considered, because I'm not really using analytics that much, and I've got issues with it.
Privacy issues. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a Search Console there, and that's extremely valuable data to go in there and look at. Like,
Yeah.
There's so many people who I talk to who they're thinking about doing some content and they never do. And like, you can literally write about anything and you're going to get some data coming in. You're going to see things coming in. And yeah, it's a little bit like it's wasted energy or something, but you can use that to iterate and start to get towards what you can do that's valuable.
Okay.
So,
that's cool. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is kind of, you start with just your own completely non-instrumental curiosity and whatever you are most interested in. Start with that. And then that brings in data. And then you will allow that to guide you somewhat in what you should double down on. I think that makes a lot of sense, because then you're not becoming a slave to the data. You're not becoming a slave to like trying to optimize some sort of like external alienating criteria, but you're somewhat holding yourself accountable to data and to reality and to being strategic, but within the bounds that you set autonomously.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't, eventually you have to make some choices. Eventually you have to say, hold on a second, is this working fine?
Yeah, you're good.
Nothing's changed. Okay. Eventually you have to make tough choices where you see an opportunity and you can't follow it. So this online dating blog that I was talking about, I made $150,000 off of this site during its lifetime. I killed it several months ago. It made some money in 2019, but I killed it because sometimes you got to burn your boats, especially if you're a person who's curious, who has shiny object syndrome, who is curious about a lot of different things. It's probably why, you're an intellectual. And maybe that's one of the reasons why you don't want to go into academia, which was probably the main reason for me, was I don't think I could have even focused on one subject enough to get a PhD or something. And so if you have those tendencies, if you have that low need for closure aspect to your personality, sometimes you have to mitigate that. And sometimes you got to do things where it's like, all right, well, I'm making money on this site. I'm not doing anything. Should I keep it?
Couldn't you have sold it? Did you think about why kill it and not sell it?
I could have sold it, but do I want to learn how to sell a website?
Right. That would be a lot of work to do that. Right.
It would be work to do. It'd be a hassle. It's not a skill that I want to build. And I eventually just decided, well, it's occupying space in my mind. Things could happen where maybe it would get broken and then I would get sucked into it. And so I just killed it.
That's pretty powerful. Your commitment to your own just autonomous freedom and creativity. I'm kind of curious. Do you have a kind of meditative practice? You seem like quite a kind of Zen type of person who's quite committed to not falling into any type of rat race or instrumental, possession.
Yeah, I do meditate every morning or every weekday, 20 minutes.
Cool.
And then I also have a new practice that I call doing jack shit, which is where I just lay in my hammock and look at the clouds and like let drool run down my chin for a while, which is actually like way easier than meditating.
That's
and
cool.
Just as good.
That's cool. Do you mind if I ask, like, how many hours a week do you work on average?
I try not to.
You probably don't count it, but just
I try to be quite disciplined about it, actually, because it's one of these things that happens when you first start on your own. Is I'm just like, I had all sorts of weird things. Like I worked from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. for a while when I first started on my own. That was like the thing that I was doing. And so it had like these weird habits because you're like, oh, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Right. But now I have like a relatively 9 to 5, 9 to 7 with like a nap and a long lunch where I'm maybe consuming audio content, which is actually, I've been able to engineer that. So it's kind of a part of my work. As I'm like cooking or showering or whatever, that I'm actually, maybe listening to a podcast episode that I'm going to be editing or that I'm going to be writing an intro for and like making that part of my work.
Right.
So I guess it'd be like, let's say 8 to 7, 11 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then, 2 or 3 hour break in the middle of that is 9, 45, 50 hours of like realistically, right? Most people say like, oh, I worked 100 hours a week and they don't count the time.
No one does. Yeah.
And they're not actually doing that. But, and then, I read a lot and I kind of engineer that. So it's like, I'm kind of always working. Like I even view relaxation as serving my goals,
right?
Which some people think is really perverse.
But I think when you've optimized things as much as you have for your own curiosity, and I mean, it's very clear talking with you, you really have thought long and hard about separating yourself from the money grind and the kind of instrumental forms of possession that can occur. If you've done that adequately, then you can work 50 hours a week without, falling into a bad kind of rat race, stressed out mentality, because it sounds like you've made allowances so that a good chunk of those work hours every week is actually reading in a way that's genuinely curious, that's genuinely personally motivated. It's not like a kind of hustle. So I wonder if there's a lesson there. Like it's almost as if by really taking a lot of precaution and insulating yourself from obsession with money or with optimization, you've actually allowed yourself to work longer hours in a way that's more stable and more fulfilling or something like that.
Yeah, possibly. I don't view my reading as work necessary unless I'm specifically looking for a particular thing, but it is very much a part of my process to read exploratory, have exploratory reading. And that's where I find stuff all the time. And I have a system for managing that knowledge when I find something and I highlight it and I want to use it in a book in the future or something. So in a
Right.
way, I am always working. Every once in a while, I do need to like remind myself to just shut off my brain. It can be a little bit of a prison that you create for yourself when you build everything around your curiosity and what you want to enjoy to do. It sort of does become like you're always working. And prison's a strong word. It's quite nice. But you know, if I sit down, if I feel some inspiration on a Saturday morning and I sit down with a whiteboard and I start, you know, writing some ideas that I'm going to erase, but that I'm at least exercising. Like I don't work on a Saturday, but that's clearly pushing me towards something, and I
Yeah.
don't view it as
I,
work.
I'm the same. I don't work on Saturdays, and that's when all my best ideas come, and I'd actually end up doing the best stuff. Like I'll get some great idea, and I will end up working, even though I say I'm not going to. I tell my wife I'm not working today, but then I'm so relaxed and open minded. I get a really good idea, and then I'll actually work on it for like 3 hours straight, and I'll actually do something really quite valuable that then becomes something valuable later. So it's weird how that works, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's actually the focus of the book that I have coming up, Mind Management, Not Time Management, which
Okay.
is basically that you look at the way that we look at time. We look at time as this linear thing. We look at it as this resource to be managed. But and then that's kind of left over from Taylorism. That's left over from how quickly can we move these bricks and put them in a wall and then like build a brick wall. And so like that's left over. And you know, if you have your best ideas when you're relaxing on a Saturday, or I often have my best ideas like if I happen to go on vacation for like a week, somehow in the middle of the next week, suddenly I have this great idea.
Yeah.
Well, when did the value happen there? Like it's not because of the number of hours I was working. It was setting my mind into the right state in order to create something. And sometimes that involves not doing anything.
Right. We're giving everyone who's listening to this a great justification to just be lazy as fuck sometimes. It's actually the best way to be powerful and create value.
I think it's barbell strategy, you know.
Right.
I think that's might be the best way to describe it. Is like I always have a morning in the mornings. It's like most important projects for the first hour of the day or whatever, and then it starts to relax a little bit, and I kind of have a system for managing my creative energy. And there is like times where you're like you're not slacking off here, but then you're also slacking off in a way later on that it happens to feed into what you're doing.
Right on, right on. So David, I think I only booked you for about an hour. Do you have to run, or are you good to go a little bit longer? I don't want to be respectful.
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm fine. I'm enjoying myself. So yeah, glad to talk longer.
Cool. We'll go a little bit longer then. I won't abuse the privilege. One thing I wanted to ask you about, just switching gears somewhat randomly, is something that I know absolutely nothing about yet, but I know that you have been doing for some time, which is advertising. I know you run advertising campaigns for your books. I would love to hear a little bit about that from a high level, especially maybe geared to someone like me who's I probably am at a point where I could start experimenting with that and maybe effectively, but I don't really know. I just haven't really felt like tackling that yet. I just haven't gotten there. So what would you say to someone like me who maybe has published a few books of their own and are, pleased with their results, but are thinking about advertising, especially advertising for books? Any kind of just general high level principles that I should be aware of?
Yeah. So I saw one of your books on Amazon. Are there more?
Yeah, no, there's only one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, Amazon's basically pay to play now, which is kind of unfortunate, but at least like Seth Godin, who really knows a lot about publishing, said like, well, publishing has always been expensive. It's just that self-published people didn't know that, So I'm paying, I've spent as much as $6,000 in a month to make $7,000 in
Wow.
royalties on books, and I when I put that on the Reddit self-publish thing, people were like, wow, you made a profit. That's amazing. But
Okay.
then also people are like, I can't believe you spent $6,000. But I have an unlimited budget for advertising that clearly works, and $7,000 is more than $6,000. So yeah, Amazon is basically pay to play now. Yeah, you can make some more organic sales come through, but if you want to maintain visibility, you pretty much have to be running ads.
Is that true for all books, would you say, or are there heuristics about when you should do that or when you shouldn't, or do you believe that applies as a general rule for
I
books on
think
Amazon?
you want to have some reviews at least, if you're going to make a profit. Um, I'm fortunate in that my main book, I think I had 50 reviews before I started advertising, and now I'm approaching 300 reviews, and so I've run a lot of keyword ads, which I think at the very least an auto campaign, which is Amazon will find the keywords and running that and playing with a budget and looking at it as a learning experience. A lot of people, they spend $5, they lose it, they don't sell books, and then they freak out and then they just never advertise again.
Mm.
So you got to invest in it in learning it. And I think the auto campaigns are quite good because I have really gone down the rabbit hole in terms of trying to optimize keyword ads using things like presses on and setting up an automations where there's different campaigns that are feeding into each other. The lock screen ads, the Kindle lock screen ads, I am able to make a profit decently with those. I think a lot of people get frustrated with them because the reporting is really bad, which you can see in my latest income report, which I think you have already read. The reporting is bad. Like what you see in your KDP dashboard showing you how many books you're selling is going to be way more than what you're seeing in your Amazon ads dashboard, which is telling you that you spent all this money and you didn't sell any books.
Okay.
Because it's weird because Amazon, they could be the biggest ad platform in the world, but their ads actually kind of suck. Like I'm getting these like romance novels advertised to me on my Kindle, and not my genre. Never read that before. They advertised my own book to me, which was cool. But then I realized, wait, I already bought my own book. Like, why are you advertising it to me? And then also the reporting is pretty bad too. But I would say auto campaign at the least. Experiment with the lock screen ads, and they can take a while to turn on, and the reporting that you see is not necessarily going to be correct. And so if you can isolate where you don't have sales coming in and you aren't spending money, and then you run an ad, and then you can look at your sales and you can start to cross-reference that way. So you have to be quite methodical about to not be stabbing in the dark.
Right. Okay. But you think really the only prerequisite is having some reviews, presumably positive reviews. And then from that, you should have some success with ads on Amazon as a general rule. There are in cases where you think, don't bother.
It's hard for me to say because I feel like I've spoken to so many people who just can't have any luck with ads for some reason. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm in a fortunate position where I've been building a platform for years and years and years. And so I don't have a ton of trouble making some organic sales and getting some reviews to at least get things started. But it is a flywheel. And in fact, this is an interesting thing, is that some people can't get their ads to run even. And part of the reason why they can't get their ads to run is they're not making organic sales, or maybe they're not bidding enough and they're not making organic sales. It's like when you have organic sales coming through, Amazon runs your ads more. So I woke up one morning and Seth Godin, who is a popular author in the marketing space, extremely popular, had blogged my book, had recommended my book on his blog. And I had a huge spike in sales. But I went and looked at my ads. I also had a huge spike in ad spend. So it was like, as soon as I was making the money, selling books, Amazon was also spending it. So,
Okay.
which I didn't like, I still made more money than I would have normally, but you have to have some patience with it. I think that's part of the problem people have is they can't even get their ads to run, which I just try to make like a ridiculously high bid and at least get it started with it. Just not being afraid to lose a few bucks in the process of learning, because you can start selling books. And the quote unquote right way to be a nonfiction author is to have the back end, to have, I've got my course, I've got my coaching, and then I've got my book, and then the book is helping me sell that stuff.
Right.
I'm not doing it the right way. I just like books, but I'm still able to make a profit. If I had a back end business, I would be like, I would be willing to lose money on my books.
Right.
Like if the difference between giving away a book for free and spending $10 to get somebody to buy your book for $10, those are two different customers. Because one of them spent $10 to buy your book, and that person is going to value your book more. They're reading your book. They're reading what you wrote. If it costs you $10, well, okay, like you get $7 royalty. So like, let's say it costs you $7 to get $7 royalty. That's pretty good. It's a good start. There's a cash flow problem there because Amazon takes roughly 90 days to pay you, and you have to pay for the ads kind of upfront.
Right.
There's a cash flow issue there. So you kind of have to build things up.
Okay.
But
that's good.
But it can be a lead generation.
Yeah, right on. Okay, that's great. So the basic lessons I'm getting from you are you're a big fan of Amazon ads. You think they're quite worth it. You should have some reviews first. Use the auto keyword option. You've had a hard time beating that through any kind of custom approach, and try to keep the organic sales going to keep the ads. And
pricing
also
promotions work very well.
What is it?
Pricing promotions work very well. Just like, because Amazon's algorithm also has various cliffs in it, I've been told, of 30 days, 90 days, perhaps there's one of less as well. Is it like, if you have a big spike, you'll kind of have a bump for 30 days. If you have a big spike, you'll kind of have a bump for another one for like 90 days.
Okay.
And so kind of regularly putting on your schedule some kind of pricing promotion and having some place to promote that, such as an email list. Like I've began experimenting with kind of having ones that I send to new subscribers, and then every once in a while one that I just send to the whole list. I'm doing a pricing promotion with BookBub in a couple weeks here.
And for people who don't know what you're talking about, by pricing promotion, you just mean lowering the price for a temporary time, right?
Yeah, right. Put it on sale. Right. Exactly. And so my book, The Hard to Start, I crowd edited it. People read it for free. It was for free on Amazon for a little while. This is 2.5 years ago. So gave away 3,000 books, something like that. I don't know. Then for a while it was 99 cents. Then for a while it was $2.99. Then for a while it was $4.99. It's been $9.99 for quite a while now.
Okay.
And so now I'll do a promotion every once in a while for $2.99. It'll be $1.99 in my BookBub promotion that's coming up soon. And BookBub is this would be my first BookBub promotion. I'm told it's your big break, because really? It does. They're going to send it to 1 million people.
Okay, interesting. See, I always thought all of those platforms were primarily for fiction. So that's interesting.
So the how-to and advice category, it'll be sent to 1 million people. It's going to cost me $1,000. They estimate 1,300 sales per book. It's going to be $1.99, and that's in Amazon has a 35% royalty rate at that price.
Okay.
So I'll be getting like 70 cents each. So it is going to be like, can I break even? But also, I'm told that if I stack it with some other promotions, I might have a chance at a Wall Street Journal bestseller run.
Interesting. So how does that work? So Wall Street Journal indexes to BookBub, or what's up with that?
The Wall Street Journal has an ebook section, and self-published books are eligible for it. I'm told roughly 3,000 to 5,000 books between, in a week, roughly Sunday through Saturday. if you can sell that amount of books, you can perhaps hit the list. And I know several self-published authors who have done that. Now, I mean, it's like, part of me is like, I shit on those lists because who cares if the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times like thinks that your book is great? Like that's just another mainstream channel, but it means something to people. It does improve your reach. I still think that if you get the little bestseller tag on Amazon and it says bestseller, you're a bestseller. That's end of story. Some people will argue with that.
Yeah, I think my book was like close to, I think it might've been number one or very close. I have the records in like the anarchism section. It was like bestseller in anarchism. That's my claim to fame.
Yeah. So yeah, you're a best-selling author now. So
yeah. It's funny.
Tell me it's not true.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, for sure. Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that even the most official lists are totally fucked with. Like the New York Times bestsellers, they will literally just someone's buddy. You have a buddy on like on the board, and they'll like, it's totally jiggered with. It's even the most official, seemingly rigorous and prestigious lists are essentially like someone's friends deciding that.
New York Times especially.
Yeah.
It's not just sales. Like they curate that list. You can sell a lot of books and not beyond that. I don't know if that's true for Wall Street Journal, perhaps. But yeah, that's the whole thing is like, it's funny. There's, I call myself a best-selling author. I did have a book that was in the top 20 of all of Amazon for a little while. So I mean, nice. It's not a huge stretch. And then I've had the #1 bestseller tag, which is
that's super legit. That's super. If you were in the top 20 of all Amazon, that's no stretch at all to call yourself a best-selling author. Yeah, for sure.
But I think that you are a best-selling author too, and people in traditional publishing will argue with that. Now, that's not a real bestseller.
Right.
There's people who are, but I think that the conclusion is really just like, well, maybe it's just that there's not 3 parties deciding now what you should read.
Right. Right.
There are definitely hundreds of categories.
Right. I mean, there are definitely books on the New York Times bestseller list that are in some sense not real bestsellers. Like they did not get there through a kind of objective indexing process. So yeah, I agree with you that it's all.
You can buy the list too. I mean,
right.
There's services that will do that for you. I don't remember what it costs, 40,000 or something like that. I think you need to be a traditionally published. You don't like need to be a traditionally published author. Don't quote me on that. It's pretty hard to do as a self-published author, if it's doable at all. But people buy it. I mean, yeah, you totally see people who are New York Times bestselling authors, and you can just look at their Amazon page, like they did not sell that many books.
Right. Well, so we have a few questions from the audience, not too many, so it shouldn't take too long. But I feel like we should maybe transition to that. I want to let people get their questions in. So one question is from Grassy Knoll, and the question is, I believe this is for you, David. You mentioned having a system for managing material you find while reading for later use.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what is that system like?
Absolutely. I'll preface it with a famous one, which is Ryan Holiday, who has the Commonplace book. He reads books, paper books, then writes down on index cards the passage, and then has these boxes full of these things. And that's the way that he organizes it. And I started with that a little bit. It was a nightmare. And then when I moved down to Columbia, one of the things that happened was I could not really get paper books so much anymore. And I was sad about that, but I did have to start getting Kindle books. And it turned out to be great because now I highlight on my Kindle. Yellow is general highlight. Blue is whenever I see a pattern, like this is a story I might want to use, and like this is a theme that I'm thinking about. Orange is I need to follow up with it, like it's a book recommendation or they mention some historical fact that I want to look up later. Pink is this is a word that I don't understand, some term. That's when I was reading on my iPad. Now I have like a regular Kindle, so I use O, P, Y, whatever, or I don't use Y, Y is the default. So I highlight on my Kindle, and then I have a service called Readwise at readwise.io. Fantastic service. I don't know how much they do on their free plan. I'm not exactly sure, but it syncs all my highlights, and then it sends me every day just a random set of highlights from my whole collection of highlights. So it resurfaces these ideas, and it resurfaces them in a context where I can now act on them. I don't need to stop reading. Like I get the orange, if I see like an orange one come in, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll look that thing up now. If I see a blue thing come in, I would say, well, maybe I'll write a tweet about that, or maybe that goes with a book that I'm writing, and I put that somewhere, and so I'll review things that way. And with Readwise, you can manually add highlights too. So if you have paper books, you can manually add highlights, and you can tag things and organize them, and that's how I collect reading. But I'm also always capturing. I always have whiteboards lying around the house, notebook in my pocket, an inbox on my iPhone SE, and then those things. I try to keep rituals of getting those inputs and then putting them somewhere where I might need to use them later. So I'm just trying to always capture, because think about like a building that is really tall has a water tower on the tower, because it's not very efficient to pump the water up every time somebody opens a tap. So you pump all the water up, you have it stored on the tank, and then when you need it, someone opens the tank, then you got the water. So like instead of sitting down and trying to think of great ideas, just trying to always capture and have a good way to be able to manage them.
Right on. Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice metaphor for sure. Great. Thanks for answering that one. And another question here is from Joshua Hansen. Joshua asks, and honestly, this is probably a lot of people are probably thinking about this, because a bit of background. A lot of the people I talk with and in my orbit are thinking about probably doing their first book sometime in the not too distant future. And so people have varying audience sizes, usually quite a modest audience. They've never published a book before. So a lot of people listening to this are curious about what you're sharing, because they're thinking about kind of gearing up to do their first book launch in one way or another. And so Joshua's question is, if you don't have a lot of cash and you're writing your first book, and it's in a very kind of narrow niche that is perhaps not as marketable as, the advice or the how-to genres. Like a lot of people I hang with are doing kind of obscure stuff on history or politics or, different types of more academic topics that don't really have a kind of clear, value proposition. Not a lot of people probably are going to see it on their Kindle screen and be like, oh, this, I want this today. You know what I mean? So with that different type of challenge, and especially if you don't have a lot of cash and you're doing this for the first time, do you think ads are still a viable thing, or maybe not? And if not, if you have any other kind of words of wisdom for this particular type of author situation?
Yeah, keyword ads would certainly be worthwhile. I mean, so somebody's searching for the topic, though also thinking about the right keywords in your title and the subtitle. I have a book called How to Write a Book, or it's a short read called How to Write a Book. And then you can see I have an extremely long subtitle. I filled the subtitle up with all the keywords that I could that might be related to it, just kind of to be, just mischievous. And the book does pretty well. It gets decent organic search. So thinking about what keywords people might use, you can also do some research on those keywords and see the volume. One way to do that is to type in to Amazon search bar. You start typing, and then if it shows up in the auto suggest, somebody's been searching for it.
Right.
And so you can find keywords out. I would also like to challenge this idea that if you're into history or you're into these academic things, I mean, I don't know specifically what, or say philosophy, if you're into any of these things, that you can't make it marketable. I mean, maybe I can understand that there might be ways of writing that you do in academia, but look at, say, like Ryan Holiday, if people are familiar, has basically looked at Stoic philosophy and turned it into self-help and has something going. So it's like, especially if you're, it's hard for me to imagine, like, if you are studying a philosopher, first of all, why would you be studying the philosopher? If this philosopher is useful for your life,
right?
Well, can't you communicate that to people. I mean, people need mental operating systems to get through life now more than ever. So it takes some learning, but I do think that if you're creative, you can really turn a lot of things you wouldn't expect into marketable ideas.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I appreciate that pushback. I guess maybe I can be a little fatalistic or, resigned to the fate of kind of impractical, non-instrumental value. And
if you want to do academic writing, go be an academic. But
yeah, no, it's a good point. I guess you're right. Like, and no matter how academic or seemingly obscure and non-useful or non-practical your topic is, if you're interested in it for some reason, right? So it's like finding why it is you're personally interested in it is possibly a kind of hidden key to creatively framing it in a way that could resonate with people's desires and values more.
Well, perhaps. Like stoicism, like when Ryan Holiday started beating that drum and Tim Ferriss was helping him beat that drum, it was just like, what are you doing? But it's huge. It's right. Huge now.
But you know what a lot of people would say, David, is that this is a problem, right? And that this is there's nothing wrong with useful, actionable, practical books by any means, but that there is a kind of problem, especially for more kind of intellectual purist types of people, which is that if you're reducing or seeking to reduce every possible kind of disinterested intellectual topic into some type of sexy, actionable, practical thing, that in some sense this is kind of the capitalist machine, like chewing up and spitting out everything that's beautiful and true and pure into kind of grist for the mill of just like another commodity. So, and I do think there's something there, right? So your point is well taken about kind of finding the useful upshot of whatever it is you're interested in. But I wonder if there is still kind of open space to be explored in the production and the financially sustainable production of more disinterested, not useful stuff, right? I mean, people will buy books that are just like a biography of a thinker or a history book about some particular period that they're interested in. There's nothing useful about it, right? That is something that exists. It's just, I don't know if many people have really cracked that nut in the self-publishing world. Maybe they have. Maybe I'm not as familiar.
I mean, if I could think of my least marketable book is about the font papyrus.
Oh yeah.
And I just got obsessed with it for like a year and wrote like a 7,000 word essay on it. And yeah, it sells nothing. But it was a black swan play. It was all right, this is likely not going to sell anything, but it's weird enough and it's a bold enough like offering that it's possible that someday like Boing Boing will be like, how does this even exist? And blog it or something, and
interesting.
It will explode.
And did you say it's only 7,000 words?
Yeah, well, that's another thing is that I want to encourage people to publish a book tonight. Like, I actually did this. You can put whatever name you want in the author field. You can publish a 500 word anything tonight, and you can unpublish it when you're done. You can run some ads on it. You can try to get a friend to buy it, see what happens, watch your rankings, see what happens. Go through the process. You can unpublish it if you want. I mean, it'll always be like, I still have the one that I wrote in my reports. It's always there, but it's not, I unpublished it. So I published like a 500 word thing. But once you go through that process, once you see your book up on Amazon, you're like, that was scary easy. I mean, it really gets your gears going. And so I have these short reads too. So I have books that are 4,000 words. I've got How to Write a Book. It's available as a free blog post, but it still makes me thousands of dollars. It's a 7,000 word thing. I've translated it into Spanish. You can write short reads. If it's a blog post, might as well be a Kindle book too, because two ideas here that I want to talk about. One is, if you go to a bookstore, there's a 10-page book and a 1,000-page book. Which one are you going to notice? you're going to notice the 1,000-page book. It's got a big fat spine on it. You can see it on the shelf. The 10-page book is just a little pamphlet. On Amazon, you could put up a 10-page book. It's got the same real estate as War and Peace.
Right.
You can, each one that you write, each one that you promote, you kind of learn something like, oh, well, there's some parts that were surprising. So,
and you can make a good chunk of change on quite short books of 7,000 words. Those can pull in as much money as longer books. That's what you're saying?
The book that I have, How to Write a Book, has been very surprising.
Wow.
I do run ads on it. I could not run it. If I shut off all ads for The Heart to Start, which is my 140-page full-length book, and then How to Write a Book, which is 40 pages, How to Write a Book would probably, if I started from scratch, we'll say, because now The Heart to Start has a better reputation. But if I started from scratch, How to Write a Book would definitely sell more, because The Heart to Start, the value offer isn't as straightforward. You can kind of do like you're writing about a topic, people are going to search about, or you can do this sort of thing where you're trying to change the culture with an idea, and the potential is bigger, but you got to get over the hump first.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. I think I on some level kind of was aware of that, but I never really thought about it that way. So that's useful. Yeah.
So I would encourage people anyway, just to if you have, especially people who I've been working on this book for 5 years and they're just putting so much into it. There's just so much unknown. Put out like a 5,000 word short read, or do a 500 word thing tonight and then unpublish it. Just
to learn how it works.
Something smaller that will reduce some of that tension.
That's great advice. That's really cool. Thanks for that. If it's not too much, maybe one more question. This is a big, juicy one. It's a big, juicy one. If you're, if you still got the, if you're not too tired. So it's a good question from Lim. Lim asks, do you think the most disruptive developments to the publishing model have already occurred, or are they yet to come? In other words, how stable do you see our current situation? Will we even be self-publishing on Amazon 20 years from now? So maybe that's an example at the end there, but the larger question I think is, are you thinking about, or do you see any kind of major changes imminently on the horizon?
I have a tough time imagining us not self-publishing on Amazon years from now. I'll start with, I don't know. But just to speculate, of course, I think that a lot of the changes have happened, but people haven't noticed. People still don't know that they can put a book up on Amazon tonight.
Right.
People still don't know that. They just your Amazon. It's so deceiving. A lot of people don't know the difference between traditional publish and self-publish. They're like, oh, you wrote a book. I mean, I've seen, I was researching somebody the other day, and she had written, she was a comedian, and she had written some 10-page book or something. And then I did some Googling, and there she's on these news programs talking about this book, because the media doesn't really care whether it's 250 pages. Just you've got a book, you want to talk about this topic? Okay, let's go. So it's funny. I think that a lot of things about books have changed, and the catching up hasn't been done. This idea that you can write a blog post and make it a book. People aren't getting that
right
as much as I think they should. And think about it this way. All right. The attention economy model sucks. That's why when you search for stuff now, the information you find is getting worse and worse and worse. There's more and more pop-ups. There's more and more ads. There's more and more privacy invading middleware. But go on Amazon, search for how to add a device to your Kindle account. You will find several books that are $3, and they're about how to add a device to your Kindle account. And you will find people complaining that this should be free information. Okay, well, it's a questionable thing to do, but there's something very interesting in that, which is that the Kindle is a paid web browser. Is that these people searched on Amazon because they thought they were going to find a help document, and they found this book and they bought it. And people search for things on Amazon, and there's certain people who, heck, me, I would rather buy a book for $4 than search on the internet, even for most things, because the content is so bad. And of course it's bad, because there's no way to make money doing it hardly, other than there's a few different options, either like fill it up with ads and try to get people to click on stuff, or there is try to get people into your funnel. But buying a book is just a way more honest exchange. It is value for value. It is here. I mean, obviously people write books for all sorts of reasons, and there's books that are not that helpful or that are just for making money, but it's a there's different mechanics at work there than just, can we get people to click on this headline so that it will show up in Facebook's algorithm more? Like, that game has changed media in some very bad ways. And the things that people will click on to then game the algorithm on, say, Facebook, the things people will click on and things people will pay for, different things.
Yeah, for sure. That's
so, yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot of things that have changed, and I just think that the world hasn't caught up yet. And the opportunity is there. There's a vacuum right here. And if you're brave enough to go out there and keep publishing and learn and try to figure out how to be good at this, and then to one day have your full-length book out, that you will be so much better at marketing than you would have been before. That's blue ocean right there, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's very well put. Yeah, and I like that answer to the question. You're basically saying that the publishing revolution that's already happened in some sense over the past several years hasn't even fully come to fruition, because most people don't even realize the implications quite yet. So it's almost like the answer to what I'm hearing from you, David, that your answer to this question that Lim posed is, it's like 20 years from now, we're still going to be probably experiencing the tail end of the revolution that we're already kind of living through, because apparently it takes time and apparently people are slow to update. And so it's almost like, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like,
perhaps I'd like to add to it.
Please.
Actually, it's just that it also is our idea of what a book is. Our idea of what a book is like, oh, it's 200 pages, and it's made of paper,
right?
And a lot of that is left over from economics, the economics of traditional publishing, which is there's certain unit cost economics there that make it so that we want books to be 200 some pages, and so that you end up with these books that are one idea, basically a blog post, 250 pages of filler, because that's the way the economics work. And then you have authors also who are killing themselves over their launch because there's certain resources that are available in the publisher, such as a publicist or whatever. And this publicist is assigned to this book for this long, and we're going to see if it does well. If it does well, then maybe we'll add some more resources. If it doesn't do well, then forget about it. And so authors also have that idea of things. And don't forget that, like, pamphlets powered all sorts of, like, the English Revolution, the feminism, the American Revolution. Pamphlets powered these things, and they made money for the people who published them. And I'm not saying that every pamphlet was like highly intellectual or something, but blogs were supposed to be the new pamphlets. That didn't work out. So why aren't we publishing more pamphlets?
Right on. Right on. Well, I think that's about as good a closing as I could have hoped for. David, I just want to thank you so much for your time. People seemed like they were quite entertained and interested in what you were putting out. So thank you so much for coming on and for being generous with your time and teaching us all that you've been able to.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome. It's been fun. And yeah, let's stay in touch, shall we, David?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. I'll let you go now. Thanks again.
All right.
Take care. All right, everybody. That was cool. I hope you enjoyed that. I learned a lot. David definitely has way more experience than I do publishing books and this whole kind of new world of Amazon and all of that and everything we discussed. So this was definitely illuminating for me, and I hope it was illuminating for you all. So yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, please do go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. If you are listening to this at a later date on the podcast, thank you for listening. You're probably already subscribed to the podcast. If not, go ahead and do that. And I'll just say that if you're working on a book, or if you're trying to do any of this stuff, you should reach out to me, because I'm very lucky that a lot of people right now are kind of talking to me and networking with me. I'm getting a lot of emails and DMs from people who are basically trying to write books and trying to do this type of stuff just like I am. So I'm super into it right now. I'm happy to help if there's any way I can. So please don't be shy. Email me, shoot me a DM, or if you do have a kind of active project that you're trying to develop, you might want to check out indiethinkers.org. You can request an invitation if you want. It's still in private beta. I'm not really hyping it up too much because I'm still building it, but we have a ton of cool people in there already, and it's off to a great start. So yeah, if it's got a bunch of features basically to support people who are trying to do their own independent intellectual work, because it's not easy and it's a weird, new, confusing world. So yeah, I'm basically trying to build some systems and structures that can support other independent intellectuals like myself trying to figure out this new frontier, if you will. And for the next few weeks or months, maybe even, I'll be, as I said at the beginning of this, really focusing my podcast on trying to bring in other people who are skilled and experienced in different aspects of this new world of digital hustles, trying to learn how, serious intellectuals can kind of play this content creator game in perhaps new ways that have not yet been fully understood by people. So that's kind of what I've set my mission to, trying to uncover that and share whatever lessons, insights, tips, and tricks I can. I forgot to invite David to plug his work, so I'm going to do that for him right now. You should go check out David. He puts out a lot of like high quality blog posts, basically showing the financials of his system. And, a lot of the stuff he was talking about today, he's written blog posts about. You can find a bunch of his books on Amazon. He definitely works more in the kind of advice and how-to genres. But he's a smart and honest, genuine guy. He's well educated and thoughtful, and really trying to help people using, scientific literatures like neuroscience and behavioral science. He's worked with people like Dan Ariely, and he's got a background in tech. So he's got a certain kind of analytical, scientific type of spirit, even though, as you saw in our talk, that he's actually quite committed to a lifestyle of relative leisure and detachment from the market, from market pressures. I thought that was pretty cool. I was kind of surprised by that a little bit, honestly, because the impression I got from his enterprise on the internet is that he seems like he's quite a business oriented type of guy. And in some ways he is, but in other ways he kind of surprised me and impressed me with his really quite relaxed and kind of Zen attitude towards, not chasing the money, not chasing metrics, and really just optimizing for his own curiosity. So that was something that I definitely resonated with me, because I think that's something that's kind of specific to the indie thinker game, what I'm calling the indie thinker game, which is like finding a way to be financially viable, doing intellectual work independently without becoming a businessman, without becoming like a marketer. That's kind of the $1 million question to me. And so I was very, I wouldn't say surprised, but in a way, my assumptions about David's operation were somewhat belied by his quite, I think, cool demeanor. Yeah, so that was cool. It was cool to meet him. He seems like a cool dude, and yeah, I definitely learned a lot from him today. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed that. So go check out his work, is where I was going with that. I left a link to his website in the show notes, so do go ahead and check that out. He's also on Twitter. I'm sure he'd be receptive to you messaging him or tweeting at him or whatever. He seems like a genuinely nice guy who wants to be helpful. So yeah, I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you. So go check out his books on Amazon and check out his website in the link that I attached. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming out, especially the people who registered and hung out with us in the webinar. Thanks for asking the high quality questions. They were very good. I appreciate that. All right, it's getting late here for me. I better wrap it up before I start talking nonsense. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Other Life Podcast. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. See you, folks. Later on.